meeting. So I was going to start by making sure that we have hit the recording in that spirit. So I know that Nyana has, so that's great. And we're going to start by just thanking the many co-sponsors that of this webinar. There are so many organizations that wanted to co-sponsor, which I think is a real testimony to the importance of the topic and the quality of our panelists that we're celebrating today. They include the Eastside Community Network, Planet Detroit, Young Gifted and Green, formerly Black Millennials for Flint, the Harris Family Health Center, the Water Equals Life and We the People of Detroit Coalition, the Michigan Climate Action Network, the Michigan chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, White Coats for Planetary Health, which is the medical school group at the University of Michigan, the Michigan chapter of Allergy and Asthma Foundation, the Climate Change Education Foundation, and My Air, My Health. It's really an honor to work with each of you every day, and I'm so grateful for you guys spreading the word about this webinar. So what are we going to do here? I'm going to take a minute to talk about Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action, just because this webinar is reaching a much greater, bigger population of people. And then we're going to dive into the discussion here. And as we do, we know that questions will arise. So I'm going to ask each of you to put your questions in the chat. You can say @Cindy if you really want your question answered to make sure. And Cindy Knack, who's on the call, who's our Director of Operations, is going to read those questions at the end of the discussion. And we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. So save your questions, you can put them in the chat right away, but we'll deal with them at the end. And we're going to go to the next slide if I can advance it. There we go. I went too many. Okay, so who is Micah? Just real briefly, I wanted to tell you that we are one of 25 state affiliates to the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. That's a big mouthful, but what that is over 50 medical societies, including the American Medical Association, but also the pediatricians, the psychiatrists, you name it. And they represent over 700,000 practicing physicians. And also part of that coalition are many other health organizations that represent many additional non-physician practitioners. And MICA in particular, it consists of health professionals of all types. So it doesn't matter whether you're, what type of health professional, we welcome you here, or any stage of your career, from student to retiree. Our message is clear, and that is that health is near and dear to the heart of all of us. And we know that fossil fuel pollution, much like many other substances, cigarettes, opioids, vaping, sugar, is dangerous to our health, and especially to the health of communities on the front line of heavy industry, heavy toxins, fossil fuel pollution. Good news is, as we transition away, it will improve the health, especially of those populations that are disproportionately impacted. We have many campaigns. I'm not going to go through them now, but you're welcome to go using the QR code or the link that we'll put in the chat, and you can check out some of the campaigns. And if you're a health professional or know a health professional, please consider joining us. And we're going to go on to the next slide. The next thing I want to do is just have you mark a date, March 21st at 6 p.m. We are collaborating with the Well Coalition on another webinar at 6 p.m. from Crisis to Solution. We have a great list of speakers, including Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, so mark your calendar for that. And if you go to the QR, you can sign up for that or register for that right away. And now we are ready to begin our discussion. These are our list of really wonderful panelists here. And I just like to start by setting the intention of this meeting. I want everybody to just take a second, take a breath, and think, why are we here? Why are we really here? And I would guess we're here because we feel all people deserve access to quality health care. And that when we seek out health care, we we expect it will be people that we can trust, who we need to know that they will treat us with respect and they will have our best interest at heart. But unfortunately, we know that that's not the case right now, in many situations in terms of our current healthcare system. And there has been a legacy of treatment, particularly of Black and Brown people, over the course of history in the US healthcare system. So we're going to explore some of those issues here today. So rather than reading the bios of everybody, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will just start with introductions from each of the panelists. And I'm just going to ask them to give a little bit about their backgrounds and maybe what obstacles they've experienced as Black women navigating the health and medical field. And we'll start with Dr. Collins, if that's okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Lisa and Micah, for the invitation. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. Black History, although we're having a celebration tonight, Black History is every day, 365. So let me tell you the story of who I am. My name is Yvonne Collins. I am a gynecologic oncologist. I've practiced in arenas where patients pay cash for their services. And I've worked in arenas where folks have no money and they are uninsured. And my goal is to provide care the same in each of those venues, because healthcare really should be a right. And so as I grew up, I am from Chicago. I still live in Chicago, the same neighborhood where I was raised. I'll paint the picture for you. I live in South Shore. The median income is $38,000. Okay, 10% of the residents of my community live below the poverty line. 24% of them are owners of their homes. 14% have a bachelor's degree, 10% a graduate degree, and 23% have no high school education at all. When we look at what's important related to the population, just to keep it in perspective, 40% suffer from food insecurity. 50% of our children live in poverty. 14% are uninsured. And then when we look at all of the healthcare disparities that we talk about, they're evident in the community where I live. 70% of our residents don't have colon cancer screening. 49% of them don't have access to early prenatal care. And I could go on and on and on. So my life, I think many would think, started as an obstacle. I was very fortunate. My mother is a nurse. My parents divorced very early. I had the opportunity to attend a gifted elementary school. As part of my high school career, I did a dual program with one of the top universities in the country. I spent 2 days at my high school, 3 days at the university. My mother is a nurse, and I learned very early the importance of education. So there was never any discussion about if I was going to go to college. I attended a Black university. Snaps for Black universities, I think they prepare our students well. And I would say the obstacles began when I got to medical school. I remember the day my parents took me down. It was the first day of school. We entered on the lower level, and right there, Black bathrooms, white bathrooms. Now, this is the 90s. This is not even, the 60s. But it was really, it hit me forefront that racism is still alive and well. That continued. We started our clinical rotations actually first year. So we did rotations all 4 years of medical school. I remember, although I was in my white jacket and I introduced myself as a medical student, very commonly people would then ask, "Are you here to take my trash?" Very commonly. As we got through clerkships and I became a resident, again, in my white coat, introducing myself as Dr. Collins, we'd go through a complete conversation. And at the end of that conversation, they'll say, "Am I going to see the doctor now?" And so The obstacles I think that women experience, but especially Black women, and I'm talking about medicine, but I think any profession would probably say the same, is very different. And when you look at the ladder of privilege, you have the white man, you have the white woman, you have the Black man, and the very end of that ladder are Black women. So it was true then, it's true now, and we continue to battle every day for where we stand as Black women. And that's why for me, it's really important to have these conversations, but really important for me to work as I do each and every day to empower women and for them to understand the power that they have. So thank you very much and so excited about the conversation.
Wow, what a story. Uh, it's really striking, and I'm so sorry that you went through that. Um, Dr. Dixon, you want to tell us your story?
So, first of all, I'd like to thank you to Lisa and Micah. I want to ask everyone to forgive me for my voice. I actually had the flu last week and I'm just now recovering. So if I sound a little hoarse or I lose my voice in between, I apologize ahead of time. I was really excited about being on this panel. I do think that, listening to Dr. Collins, our stories are our stories, right? So our stories can be very similar in a lot of ways. I am from New Jersey, grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. And from the town that I grew up in, I was actually in the part of East Orange that is closest to Newark. I don't know if you're familiar with Newark, New Jersey. And there were sections in my town. So like I was considered a down the way kid, which means that where I lived in East Orange was actually the poor section. Again, not knowing, because when you're a kid, you don't realize what you don't have, because what you have, you're just appreciating of what you do have. And I guess in my neighborhood early on, there was an experience of, there were some white people on my block, but maybe only two families. And then one day they were gone. So basically, it was a predominantly African American area where I lived in, and almost all my classmates, it was like 89% or 90%, I'll say, that were Black, the schools that I went to. So for me, diversity, I really didn't see the challenge or the difference until I would started doing programs. So again, being interested in science and, really liking math and the STEM as a young kid, and my father and mother always encouraged us as well to actually, there was like no question. I have two sisters that we were all going to go to college, that we were all, that was just a given, that we were actually going to graduate from school and that we were going to go to college. My father was in the Air Force. He was a lifer. He actually started out, he was a Tuskegee Airman for a while. He has asthma like I have and really had some difficulty staying. My mom was a teacher. They were both from Georgia originally. My mom went to Payne College and my father went to Morehouse for a bit and then joined the service. And so they were just like adamant that we were not going, the things that were happening around us, very strict household. My father was super strict, and at the time when you're a kid, you're like, why? But then I appreciate, as I got older and actually saw the things that happened to my classmates, some died, pregnancy, all those things that you could see happen. It wasn't going to happen to us because we were just really strict household. So it wasn't until I went to some programs. I always had teachers in high school that saw something in me and would say, oh, there's a science program, a pipeline program. So we now call them pathway programs or pipeline programs. And they would actually say, we think that you should sign up for this, or we'd like to put you forward. And then I would find that I would be the only Black kid. Because, there's like all these other high schools, I'm from New York and New Jersey, and then me. And so that's when I experienced being treated differently. Because you'd be in these groups and you'd be in these sessions and people would stare at me and ask me about my hair, didn't want to be my roommates. Like we went to Florida for a while there was one called the Florida Science Study Project, where we went to different schools in Florida to look at science careers and different things. And I couldn't wait to come home because I just felt like I didn't belong. And I didn't get along with any of the girls. They didn't want to be around me. And there was one young man that actually befriended me, that went on the trips. But my father was steadfast. He was always like strict, but he was encouraging. He said, "You belong there. You're not coming home." Whenever anything like that, I need to come home. I don't want to be here. These kids don't like me. I'm not being treated the same. He would say, "You're staying. You belong there. I'm not sending for you to come back home." And I grew strength, I think, from that, and resilience. It was hard, but I became stronger because I realized that, yeah, I got here because I'm just as smart as they are. And I just kept saying that to myself. I'm as smart as they are, that I actually can answer these questions too. So I think it takes, and it continues to take resilience and that confidence building, because otherwise what can happen is that imposter syndrome that can sink in, because there are people who look at you twice, just like the stories of, they look at you and feel like you are, you the doctor, or do you know what you're talking about, or question you. But it really is having that confidence. And I always said, probably my colleagues on this call, same thing, I call it the rule of the tens. I have to be 10 times better. And so I always felt like, yeah, and I probably know more because I probably had to work harder to be here in some way. So yeah, I belong here and I need to be steadfast. So I went to college. I did go to one of the Ivy Leagues. I was recruited to go to Brown. And there was a cohort of us, of persons of color, Black students, and we kind of bonded together while we were there. And in the sciences, we also bonded together. And so that was actually a really good experience for me. And then coming to medical school, I wanted to come back home. And I wanted to go to medical school because I wanted to help my community, realizing the things I saw as a little girl, going to the neighborhood hospitals when we didn't go to the base. Some of the things that we experienced in the hospitals were kind of stuck in my head. And so I felt like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to come home and I wanted to actually take care of my people and my community. So I went to medical school in New Jersey. At the time, it was called UMDNJ, University of Medicine and Dentistry, New Jersey in Newark. And I actually worked in the very hospital, ended up in the very hospital that I actually went to a lot when I was a kid, United Hospital, which was part of the system. And basically, as a medical student, I experienced similar things that Dr. Collins was saying. However, again, it was a more predominantly Black patients that we were with. I walk in a room and they would smile. You know, they were proud. They were actually proud to see, even though I may be the only Black person, woman or man, the only Black woman, or student there, they would smile. And they were like, tell me more about you. Oh, we're so happy to see you. Or, they would just automatically want to talk to me. That's what I got. They automatically wanted to talk to me or share their stories where they weren't talking to other members on the team. So I often could get in more information than other people because they trusted me. They really just trusted me because there was a kinship there that they saw. And actually that made me feel like I did belong, but it also made me feel despair because I saw the inequities in their care. And I also saw the inequities in the health outcomes that disturbed me. And that's why I focused on disparity reduction, probably all of us, and really looking at improving and increasing diversity because we need to be seen, to make a difference. So pathway programs I do, and I do health equity work with community and hospitals and policies and things like that because I know that that's really what makes a difference.
Wow. Well, let me just say you definitely belong, and I believe you may know 10 times more. I would not doubt that. And it makes me smile that they were proud of you because they should be proud of you. You are doing really important work. Now I'm going to go over to you, Ms. Givens, who is the founder and the CEO of the Eastside Community Network, which is just such an incredible space and has put together such a beautiful wellness center called the Studemeyer. And wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are.
So it's interesting how racism kind of transcends all of these things, right? So I am actually the granddaughter and daughter of a doctor, right? So I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, while my father was in medical school at the University of Michigan, and experienced a lot of trauma, being one of 3 African-American students who was not even allowed to sit in the classroom, and had professors telling students that Black people had tails. And so in his experience, racism was something that chased him all of my life. And so I was born into trauma in that sense, right? So my father, anyway, so I was born in Detroit, born in Ann Arbor, but raised in Detroit in a bubble, right? So in our community, everybody had pretty much everything they needed. Detroit at that time was what Zora Neale Hurston refers to as Eatonville. The doctors are Black, the lawyers are Black, the police chief, the teachers, everybody, right? But my parents decided to send me to a suburban high school, Mercy High School, where my first day people walked around me and pointed at me, called me the N-word, and I had to deal with racism. Where when I took the ACT, my counselor called me in and accused me of cheating. And which is good, because if she had not accused me of cheating, I probably would not have gotten into University of Michigan myself. When she accused me of cheating, I was like, I'll show you. And so I got all A+ after that, just to let her know what I could do. And she accused me of cheating because I had somehow ended up talking to some of my classmates. And my classmates asked me how I scored on the ACT, and I told them, and they were mad, and I guess they reported me. So how dare you think you can do well on standardized tests? And so then I ended up going to the University of Michigan myself, starting in 1981, at a time where every student there thought I was an affirmative action student and wanted to let me know I was not smart enough to be in their presence. And so I had to let people know, you know what, not only am I smart enough, but I might even be better than you. And so you talk about being 10 times as good. That was like my life's goal, was to be 10 times as good and just let people know, right? And so when I was a junior in college, my parents divorced, and my father decided to stop paying my tuition, and my life completely changed. And so I'm out of school, hanging out, partying. I had no real focus. And then I decided my mother was a social worker. And in 1984, she started volunteering for the AIDS Project with the Detroit Health Department. And lacking any direction and focus myself, I volunteered for an organization they founded called the Community Health Awareness Group, where we were working with people with HIV/AIDS. And now I'm working with people who are returning citizens, sex workers, injection drug users, people who lived at the margins of society. And I did pre-test counseling. My mother, who as the social worker, was the person who delivered all of the positive test results, and I delivered the negative test results, as well as other people who were who had been trained to do this. But also Dr. Crane from the University Medical Center sent all of his HIV positive patients to us, and we had a support group. And so somebody thought it was a really good idea to have me at my young age facilitate the support group. But I was really good at it, right? So I'm working with people with AIDS. And at this point, AIDS is a death sentence. And, you know, we're having these conversations. I'm looking and I'm like, wow, these people are so intelligent. I learned so much just working with people. And my favorite person, who was just brilliant and hilarious, was a sex worker with no teeth named Lily, who was trying to teach me how to get a boyfriend, right? So I was like, okay, Lily, you may have some tips. But she, and this is significant, at that time, Black women died on average 6 months after they were diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. Lily lived for 9 years, and she became a leader. She became a minister. It was such enriching work. But as I'm working with people and talking to them, they routinely said, I'm living better now than I've lived my entire life. And then they died. This is the best I've ever lived. And then they died. And so I was really, really motivated to try to figure out what could be done to help people live and to interrupt cycles of loss, and to help people achieve their goals so that they wouldn't, you know, be able to live. And so I started working in community development. I did a lot of jobs. I worked at a youth home, and that was horrible. And then I ended up working at the organization I now work at. I'm not actually at the founder of the organization, Maggie DeSantis. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary, but You know, I interviewed for one job. She didn't hire me for that job, but she interviewed me for this job, the Partnership for Economic Independence, to help interrupt cycles of women of poverty for women living in public housing. And it was a successful program. She promoted me to deputy director. I left there a couple years later, went all over, did a lot of different jobs, and came back in 2016. But my whole focus has been, how do I help people become who God meant for them to be, right? Not beyond racism. How do I help people understand their worth and their value, and that they're more than what racism tells them they are? And so in 2020, when the pandemic hit, one of my mentees, a young man named Marlo Stoudemire, I say he's young because he was 42 at the time. So he was one of my mentees, died from COVID-19. He was the 24th person in Michigan who died on March 24th of 2020. And it blew my mind. And I heard about, of course, we worked in, health promotion, and I've done that over the years, but we talked about the social determinants of health. And we've talked about, the 9 dimensions of health. But to see a young man who had been internationally recognized a couple months before he died, who was married, whose best friend is now the president of Henry Ford Health Systems, the place where he passed away, whose wife is a senior executive there, being one of the first people to die because the health systems didn't take his initial symptoms seriously. Because he was sent home when he couldn't breathe and told, come back if it gets worse. And by the time he got back, they had to put him immediately on a ventilator. And I said, how could this happen? Why is this happening? And so there are the environmental issues. There's the area that they lived in is a beautiful home in an industrial area that no people should live. Either the industry shouldn't be there or people shouldn't live there. But the reality is people do live there in Detroit because for so long we didn't have new housing. And so now you have this new beautiful home that's built in the shadow of all of this pollution. And so we know that he was not living, and there's no trees. That's the other thing. Whole neighborhood developed with no trees. So there's no, vegetative buffer, nothing. We don't have recreation centers in our community. The recreation centers have been shut down for years. We don't have fitness centers in our community. There's no places for people to engage in to explore art, any of that. And we've got 2 hospitals in our community that have been closed in the past 20 years. One of them was built in 1984, closed in like 2004. So it only survived 20 years before they decided it didn't make sense financially to stay open. And you have people getting fragmented healthcare from all of these clinics. And they said, well, if you have a pre-existing health condition, then you are at heightened risk. Well, most people didn't know they had pre-existing health conditions until they had COVID and they had, they were really sick because we had so many people disconnected from healthcare. And so my dream was to reconnect people, first of all, to each other, to address some of the social isolation that was already happening and always happens in poor communities, to connect people to resources and whatever. So we took our building that we're in was donated to us by Henry Ford Health Centers. It's 17,000 square feet. And we took this building and we turned it into a wellness hub. And so I am the founder of that wellness hub, the Stoudemire Wellness Hub, named after Marlo. And we now have 30 classes a week. Everything that we do. We have partnerships with Wayne Health, Trinity Healthcare, and we're working on something with Henry Ford Health. We have now about 1,600 members, people who come because they just get something, and we feed people every week. And we've been able to get some funding from it. So I just really excited about really being able to, I see this as my life's work. I'm 60 and I'm only going to be doing this for about 5 or 6 more years before I try to do something else with my life. But this is bringing everything together. We're helping people find their purpose. We're helping people find what they're doing. And the amazing thing is that not only do we have 30 classes, but they're taught by people inside the community who have various skills. And so some of them are finding their purpose, coming there and teaching us. We have a woman who's a health, she's a fitness coach. She lost 60 pounds. She got really fit. And she started wanting to help other people. And we just hired her as a wellness coach to help with our weight loss challenge. And so I saw on Facebook where she was bragging, this has been my dream. I'm finally living to my dream. And so it feels really good to help people achieve their dreams, but also just to create something that feels good to people in our community, which has been so oppressed. I could talk for a long time about what it's like to be a Black woman, having people take you seriously And I don't have a medical degree, so having people take in the medical field take you serious, that's a whole nother thing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, wait a minute, I may not be a doctor, but I know what I know about the people I serve. And so building those relationships of trust. But I really want to focus it on the fact that we were able to come together and really help people see themselves. And I'll close this part by saying that we had an event one day, we had a board meeting, we had all these things going in our building because we have a lot of things happening in our 17,000 square foot space. And this young lady looked up and she says, "Is this Wakanda?" And I just was blown away.
Oh, what a legacy. What a legacy. I mean, it's clearly what a beautiful thing to say that this is my life's work and to empower people in this way. And that's a beautiful, beautiful work. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. I'm gonna turn it over then to Taylor to tell a little bit. She also kind of grew up in the Detroit area. So tell us about your pathway.
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I just want to acknowledge that this space is really full of legends. Donna, I listen to Authentically Detroit every week. Like I've been to ECN multiple times. And honestly, I am just in awe about what Dr. Dixon and Dr. Collins had said, because I am currently a third-year medical student at Wayne State. I was born and raised on the east side of Detroit. I lived in Jefferson or Newport. And I went to Catholic school first at St. Clair in Grosse Pointe, then I moved to Mercy High School. So what you said, I already know.
To Mercy.
And that was in 2012. So it's like, it was not a lot has changed. We did have iPads, but everything else was the same. And so I feel as though I'm in the presence of legends, and I am going through a lot of experiences that everyone on this panel has already spoken to. But I think all I can say is, so I'm a third-year medical student. I went to undergrad at Boston University, got my master's degree at University of Vermont, lived on the East Coast for a long time, was in social work, worked in the nonprofit space. I worked at a nonprofit called Caroline House, where I ran, it was attached to like a school, like a middle school, Louis Munoz Marin School. So I ran their after school program, as well as it was a day school for women who were learning English and were gonna learn and test for their citizenship tests. So I did that, taught me a lot. And I thought, that was what I was going to do with my life. And I loved it. I definitely got burned out to a certain degree. There's a series of, things happening both within the nonprofit, and I had a student pass, and a series of events led me to kind of rethink what I wanted to do and what kind of impact I wanted to have. I loved connecting with people. I knew that I was a people person. And I thought, maybe I should switch gears, because what I really needed was resources. I felt I was pretty limited in what I was able to do for my families. And I wanted to just get more education and know more. And so I kind of switched gears totally. It wasn't as clean as what I'm describing now, but I switched gears to medicine, entered medical school, thinking I was, maybe I'll go into psychiatry. I was doing a lot of like family mental health talking and working, especially around community grieving, especially around police violence, especially around gun violence. And I wanted to know how I could use my brain and use my ability to pursue this degree to sort of help, again, like everyone else was saying, my community. So I lived and worked in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Then I got into medical school. And like Dr. Dixon said, it was really important for me to be educated by my own community. So I applied to multiple schools, but I really wanted to go to Wayne State. I entered Wayne State in 2020. So it was, I think, a completely different paradigm of medical education. At that point, I think there was a lot of scrambling to figure out what we could do in the midst of a pandemic. And there was also in the zeitgeist, this huge demand for DEI work, and what the heck are we gonna do, because COVID is exposing all of our demons, right? COVID was exposing a lot of inequities, especially within the healthcare realm. Not that they weren't already there, but it put a magnifying glass on sort of a national level. And I think, like Dr. Collins and Dr. Dixon alluded to, I was still, I think we make up 2% of physicians. And then I think at the time, Wayne State in 2015 had only matriculated 1 Black student. So that just kind of goes to show you what it's like in medical education. In my class at the time, I think there were 40. Now, did they stay? There's a difference between people getting into medical school and then being resourced enough to stay. Whether that's financial, whether that's educational, you throw a pandemic on that. It was a lot of things that were exposed in my time. And now as a third year and reflecting back, it was all part of my training, I think. Like, there's a lot of lessons that I have yet to unpack. But in my first 2 years, I think, you all mentioned walking in and realizing there were 2 different bathrooms for you to go to. There was a lot of, you felt like you have to work 10 times as hard just to get half as far. All still very true. But I also found myself doing the work of like diversity deans as a first year medical student. I was like, I had a test on Friday, but wait, I need to go and like make sure we're having enough for the seminar on, racial bias or what have you. I was doing a lot of work and I loved it because it was my passion, because that's what I wanted to do. But I think, we spoke a lot in my first 2 years, especially I was president of the Black Medical Association. And then we worked with other different affiliates, but it was so much pressure. I kind of lost myself. I lost myself because I felt both, and I sometimes continue to feel this way, hyper visible, but seriously under-resourced. And I think that it's a particular, feeling that, one, as a Black woman in medicine, 2, as a Black queer woman in medicine, there was a lot of, like I said, hyper visibility, under-resourced. And so I was doing a lot of work that I love, but I didn't have time to be.
To reduce energy costs of the farm and potentially create new revenue streams through the sale of excess energy.
Excuse me,
This can contribute to the
somebody
financial
needs to be
stability of the
mute,
farm
please,
while
right
enhancing its
away.
long-term viability in the community
And
and
will you
adding
figure out
energy to
who
the
is
grid.
not muted?
Everyone, I think. Okay, there we go. Anyways, so I continued on, went through my first 2 years. I actually worked with Donna, ECN, tangentially with our curriculum Healing Between the Lines in Orlando, and you all were great. And a group of students and residents and attending of ours, we worked together. We really wanted to do equity work, but do it in a way that, one, the onus wasn't all on a particular group, especially within the context of the city of Detroit. So Healing Between the Lines actually matched medical students, residents with community organizations in hopes to kind of create a longevity sort of relationship to kind of garner resources. And at the end of the curriculum, it was a year long to come out with policy. So that's, I think now when it comes to Black folks in medicine, Black women in medicine, and our goals, I'm not speaking for everyone, but I think right now, we talked about this before we got on the call, it's so much more sustainable when we share the load and we don't feel like it's all on us. Even though institutions and the way racism has transformed, we'll try to think it's all on us, right? And so as I advanced and now I'm in my clerkship years, I have to just take a breath, because some of the things, especially you, Dr. Dixon, when you were talking about, you walk into a room and all of a sudden the history is completely different from what they gave, the other attending or the other resident. And it's on you, because there's this level of trust there. It is such an honor. And I wasn't prepared. I think I knew that was going to happen. And I knew that's the reason why I was supposed to be where I was supposed to be. But I realized there's another lesson there. It's so incredibly personal. I have gone through my third year, I have a month left. every single rotation, I have either treated a family member, like not directly, but like there's been a family member that's been on my service, a church member, my best friend's, you know, dad's cousin, like every single rotation, I have seen someone in my community who I know and love. And let me tell you something that drastically changes how you view the healthcare system. You see both sides. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, all right, I know I'm here to learn, I'm here to observe, but that's my aunt down there, right? And I was looking around at the rest of my team, right, my clinical team, no one's aunt's down there. No one's aunt is down there. No one's cousin's down there. No one, you know, and no one knows that, you know, this patient was off the overpass on 8 Mile near the Meijer. No one knows where that Meijer is. Like, it makes a difference, right? When you're talking to your patients, and it makes a difference in the stakes of your learning. And that's something that I'm kind of processing right now. And I find it all very beautiful. I find it all very difficult. And I find it all, you know, I think particularly unique. And I just, you know, when we talk about Black health, when we talk about needing more Black folks and people of color and queer folks and minoritized populations within our ranks of healthcare providers, I think that it's not only so that, you know, there's a diversity of experiences or opinions. I think like it's tangibly giving better care to the communities that we're in. And if, you know, if I can somehow, you know, amplify that, which is why I do the work that I do, whether it's through climate change, whether it's through LGBTQ rights, or whether it's through my work with Black Medical Association or what have you. I know that one, there needs to be more of us out there. There needs to be more of us walking into that room, talking with that patient. And there needs to be more of us remembering to go into that community, remembering to go to that church on Sunday, or if you're not religious, going to the Eastern Market, or making sure that we're seeing and advocating for our community members within and without the hospital. So that's a little bit about me. I just, yeah, I feel like, you know, you all have such wonderful legacies, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. But it's really such an honor to be on this panel. Thank you, Micah. Lisa, you already know how I feel about Micah, and I love everything about it. But yeah, I'm really excited for this talk today.
Oh man, what a story, Taylor. I'm really humbled, honestly, by each of you, and your description of being hyper visible and under-resourced is just, you know, so beautifully articulated. And I know that, boy, Taylor, I have asked you for your services like over and over and over again, which is again, that whole sense of being asked too much. And I can't thank you enough. And I'm really impressed by this, this what you described of, and all of you described it, of, you know, serving patients that you know their story. This is a community that you guys, you know, lived in, worked in, dealt with every day. And I have to be honest, I don't think I've ever experienced that, but that's got to bring a new sense of responsibility and a new dimension to the work you do. So I am incredibly grateful. So what we're going to do now, I think I want to put the last two questions together so that we're sure we have plenty of time. And, you know, basically what I really would like to explore a little bit is two things. One, really, what have you witnessed in your practice on a day-to-day basis or in your training that leads to the situation in which very justifiably there's a sense of mistrust, but especially between Black and Brown communities and the healthcare system as a whole. I'm sure that's true for other communities as well. But what have you witnessed? And then I always love the framing that Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson uses for climate change. And I'd like to have you each touch on this. And some of you already have, Donna, in your description of the Wellness Center and Studemeyer. You know, what is your vision of what healthcare could be or should be if we were to treat people with the level of respect that they deserve. So, you know, why don't we start this time? I'm mixing up the order, but are you okay with going next, Dr. Dixon?
Oh, sure.
Is that okay? Or we could go
Yeah,
with
no,
Dr.
no, it's fine. It's fine. So I was, I guess, thinking about your question, what I've witnessed, and it's like, what thing, which one? You know what I mean? It's like, I've been in
Sure.
practice a long time. I've been doing this work for many years. New Jersey and Georgia for a bit, and now Michigan. So it's sort of like, what have I not seen, right? So it's really hard for me to actually give you just one thing. I have seen things that are, I think, some common things. Like, for example, I still, unfortunately, there's language that's used, right, to describe patients. And it's not just patients of color, but more often it's patients of color, right, that actually are described as non-compliant, for example. And that's put in charts. You're non-compliant person or non-compliant Black male or white, whatever, non-compliant, which already before you even see the patient, you're actually going to have a mental picture, which is bias, of what that person's like, and even changes before you walk in the room, how you're going to treat them. So I think that those are some of the things that, when you say hope to future, I do a lot of anti-bias trainings. That's one of the things that look forward to actually probably eliminating some of the vernacular that we use still in charts and the way patients are grouped and generalized and categorized, which actually then transpires into how they are treated. I've also seen, I'm a pediatrician, so I've also, and this still happens, that, a single Black mom coming in who's necessarily and rightfully frustrated, because of what she has probably gone through before she gets to me, who actually is very much pushing, is really advocating for pushing, like, I am not leaving here till I get X, Y, and Z for my kid. I've already been in the ER and this is what's happened. And you know what she's labeled as? Aggressive, and then that's called DIFUS, where we used to call it DIFUS, and where I live, which is Division of Youth and Family Services, which is like put child abuse. This kid has been in emergency room 3 times or 4 times now with the same infection. She must be doing something wrong. Not we doing something wrong. She must be doing something wrong. So the blame is on the family. It's on the mother. Oftentimes that single Black mom is like, she gets the blame and then she gets put in the system, the kids get put in the system, and that is a hard thing to get out of. And damn it, you talk about trauma, the trauma that then carries over generationally, kids being removed and tossed around, and what happens with that, and labeling. So it's the labeling, it's the, how people perceive, because you don't take the second step back, which is what I often tell students. I say, what my mantra is, what I always said to because I did peds ER for a long time in Newark. And my mantra was, it's not about me. I would stand there, people would be yelling at me, whatever, but I would not respond because I knew at that moment there was something that happened to this woman and to that child that I need to listen to their story. She may be yelling at me, but it's not about how I feel at this point. It's really what's going on with her. I said, you have to keep that in your head. Make that your mantra. Because if you start putting you in there, and we're human, we put ourselves in there, our feelings and whatever, then you're going to do difference in care. You're not going to listen to people. And that's what I find is a problem. We're not listened to. Honestly, I was just in a meeting the other day on a weekend with a group that I'm in. And one of the stories is a story I keep hearing. And I actually wrote down the quote. It's like, I left, but I knew something was wrong with me. I knew that there was still something wrong with me. And this is a Black woman, sister, who actually went with chest pain and actually knew something was wrong. She was told, no, you got all the stress, all those kinds of things. And thank God her husband took her to the University of Michigan and she had a blood clot. Doesn't that sound like a familiar story? She would have died. But the quote was, I knew something was wrong with me, but nobody was listening to me. And that, I just wrote it because that I cannot tell you. When you read the stories, that's Serena Williams. This is what you hear. No one, the doctors aren't listening to me. Not just the doctors. They're not, for some reason, they don't hear me. They don't want to take what I'm saying seriously. And if you don't have anybody to advocate for you, like the story we just heard about COVID, that I cannot tell you how many times I heard that story as well. It's like you walk out because they say you're okay and you die. Or if you are blessed to be able to have a family member and someone says, oh, no, you're not, I'm going to take you somewhere else and we're going to demand, which then becomes that you're being aggressive, right? But I'm going to demand that you do something before I leave to see you. And I tell my patients, you need to be that way. Please be that way when you walk in. If you feel there's something wrong, do not leave. And if you need to call me, because I'll get on the phone and talk for you and help you in any way I can. But do not leave until you feel you've got your questions answered or you've been listened to. Those are the things. And then we talk about trust. There you go. If you actually have to beat down the door and be turned away and actually have family members die, which we saw in COVID, people die, or not just COVID. I mean, this person I'm just she could have died. The one with the blood clot, she could have died. I mean, she would no longer be in the group that I'm in. I just said, praise God, you're here. And that your husband decided to say, you know what, I'm going to take you to another hospital. But why did that have to happen? So those are stories. And to me, no matter where I've been, Georgia, Jersey, here, I still hear those stories. I still see it, unfortunately. And so what do I think a better world is? A better world is that you don't have to do that. That people are listening to you no matter who you are, that your color does not matter, and that they see you as the person that you are and the person that you need help for, and that somebody's going to take the time to listen to your story. I mean, and really listen. And make it not about them and what they're feeling or what they already put stereotype in their mind or what they think while you're asking for payment in your sickle cell or something, right? That's on another topic. So I just feel like, this could be 2 hours if you want, just on that. Yeah, so I don't know, Lisa, if I'm answering your question, but that's what
Yeah, absolutely. And my first thought is what a gift you are to your patients, truly. And to listen that generously, to remember that it's not about you when they hit that point, it's about them. And then I think, the implicit bias and the labeling where you're talking, where the mom who's trying to advocate for her child or for a family member is labeled as aggressive. We don't look upstream. Why do the people keep coming back? Well, maybe it is us. Maybe we do something wrong. So great points. Dr. Collins, you've done the Climate Health Equity Fellowship. And have worked both, in Chicago, but abroad. Do you want to add both of, what do you see as the essence of the problem and what would be your vision to do it better?
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. I want to piggyback on the implicit bias because I think sometimes it's not a racial thing because we all have implicit bias. And, we think about it, those are the unconscious associations or beliefs or attitudes that we have about people. I think the challenge is when you think you don't have any implicit bias and you're not really willing to step back and make that change. And I see that really in the context of everything we're trying to do related to building the workforce. So girls aren't good with math. We have to remove that perception. When we look at our itty bitty kids and the juvenile system, we shouldn't have kindergarteners being expelled from school. And 75% of the time, those are Black boys, really. When we're looking at who's applying to jobs, really the stereotype of looking at names on applications and based on that name, not really wanting to interview that person. And then we look at all of the mistrust we've seen in the healthcare system. We're not going to talk about it all today because we don't have time. You really hear about very commonly the Tuskegee syphilis experiment over 40 years, 600 men. Even when we knew there was treatment, they didn't get treatment. That increases distrust. You hear very commonly about Henrietta Lacks, a Black woman who had cervical cancer. They took her cells without consent, without her knowledge, and used them for years, really to cure other cancers and diseases, and never really got any compensation for her family from that. Those are the things we hear about. But the stories of mistrust that we don't hear about are those cities and states that dig up Black bodies to use as cadavers in medical schools. We don't hear about those folks that have monuments named after them who've done unnecessary surgery on Black women. We don't talk about our system where unnecessary sterilizations are done of detainees and those imprisoned. So there's a lot of reason for folks to have mistrust in the healthcare system. And despite all of the work that we've done with the consent process, it still remains. Because even today, when you walk into an ER, just like everybody said today, you're not listened to, you're not trusted, you're told, your pain is not really your pain, and people are unnecessarily sent away. And after you see that so many times, how can I trust you? When we look at it, I'm an oncologist. We do a lot of clinical trials trying to determine which treatments work best for cancers. We've seen when you look at clinical trials, only 10% of Black folks are included in clinical trials. So we give thousands of drugs to people that have never, ever had any studies imposed on them. So it doesn't work. Good reason that it doesn't work, because we actually haven't studied that particular drug on them. But when we look at it, we have to really be diligent about having that conversation. We have to really be diligent about telling ourselves, telling our families, telling our friends to push back, to say no, to ask questions, to have conversations, because it's great. Thank you, Taylor, for being an advocate, but everybody doesn't have that. And so that person that doesn't have that, they don't get the same treatment. They don't get the same drugs. They don't get access to clinical trials. And as long as we have that, we'll continue to perpetuate all of the healthcare disparities that we have now. And they're not going to get any better. So we have to hire folks who look like us. That's why the DEI work is so very important. Even when it's not sexy like it is now, it's important. All the literature points to, I'm going to do better and I'm going to have better outcomes when I have people who take care of me that look like me. And so we have to really push that and be diligent about ensuring that that happens. What does the world look like if we get it right? Well, I could talk all night about what it looks like. But if we look at all of the social risk factors that we talk about, we don't have poverty. We don't have unequal housing. We don't have substandard housing. We don't have housing in red lines. We don't have zoning for homes. All of our children have access to early education. All of our students have equal access to education. You shouldn't have students on one side of a community using textbooks that are older than their parents, and then on another side of a community have complete access to what's new and what's vivid and what's bright. We shouldn't have environments where there are no trees. We should not have environments where it's contaminated water. We should not have places where the air is polluted. We should ensure that we have not only access to healthcare, because we could talk about access all day, but if it's not evidence-based and driven, it's not quality healthcare. And we want folks to have quality healthcare. We want people to have a living wage. How can you expect me to pay for my medications when I'm uninsured, when I'm concerned about I have to balance paying my rent and paying bills and buying food for my children in daycare? How can you expect me to pay $300 for insulin? We can't. So in a world, I see it, we would eliminate all of those things. We wouldn't have voter suppression. We know that our vote matters because they every day try to suppress it. And so the world in a better place, we eliminate all of those things. All of the things we talk about related to social risk factors, they're gone. And everybody has an even playing field and a right to all of those things that are basic standards of life. I hope I'll see it in my time, but that's what the perfect world looks like to me.
That's so beautiful. And I think so spot on and a great ideal to work towards. You know, I have to be honest, I did not know that they dug up Black bodies as cadavers. I did not know that. And oh my God, I can't, oh, that's just horrible. And the issue of voting, you know, that's such an important issue. I hope many of the people here are aware of Vote ER, which is an organization started by an ER doc, a Black ER doc in Boston, who is encouraging health professionals to wear lanyards that in their clinical practice, that basically when the patient comes in, you ask them as part of their social determinant of health, are you registered to vote? Do you vote? And then the patient just checks the QR code and they can tell if they're registered, and if they're not registered, they can register themselves right then while you're going back and doing something else. And then you follow up, making that connection that access to vote and participation in vote is a social determinant of health. I think it's a really cool program and a great point. Anyhow, Taylor, you have done some work, you know, with the implicit bias book club at Carmanos, and you're on that board. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and what you see as
For sure. So yeah, I think so. I'm on I'm a frequent panelist as well as on the board of the Carmanos Health Equity Implicit Bias Book Club. And every couple times per quarter, we choose a book, and then we invite either the author of that book or panelists to speak about some of the major themes. And I studied sociology in undergrad, so it's like my bread and butter to talk about, some pretty interesting sociological figures, and sort of bring that to medicine. And I think it's really important. I work with some great people, Dr. Mike Simon, Danny Inman, a lot of folks over at Carmanos are really trying to figure out, okay, we know we have these biases, like what, other than, being aware of them, what are some tangible ways that we can sort of educate ourselves, right? I'm a real firm believer, even as a medical student, that there are so many different types of intelligences. And I don't think one person is smarter than the other. They just have, an intelligence in a certain area that this other person does not, right? I can tell you everything about Beyonce, right? I can tell you about her whole life story. And I can happen to be able to tell you about the Krebs cycle. But there could be people who have other intelligences. And so I think in the field of medicine, especially medical training and even beyond, it's really important to uplift other voices that are experts when it comes to, in particular for the Carmanos Book Club, sociological paradigms, right? So we talked the idea about, there's a book called White Trash. We talked about a book called Unequal Health. We talked about Henrietta Lacks, and really kind of trying to understand the major sociological themes through reading, which reading is essential and we love it. But we really want to sort of highlight, these major themes that affect our patients every day, right? And I'm in particular, and I know Dr. Dixon didn't want to go into it, but I'm in particular interested in sickle cell and HEMONC in particular. So I'm gonna say my little two-piece about it. We know sickle cell primarily affects those of African descent. We've had the same treatment until recently. We've had the same treatment, hydrourea, since 1970. And it's not really been funded until recently. And we now have brand new treatments. And I am currently on HEMONC floors. And it's pediatrics, so I'm working with, child sicklers, which is when you see a lot of admissions. But my particular interest is when they grow up, right? And what happens after, they turn 18 to 25 and they got to go get adult care. What does that look like? We now know a lot of people fall off, right? Because you get a lot of great care when you're a kid, because you're just learning how to manage your disease, and then you grow up and you kind of fall off. And so when you ask, what does it look like when we get it right? I think two things. One, I think it's time to start valuing these other intelligences and bringing them into the medical profession, like the Carmanos Book Club. And two, I think point blank, as someone who is interested in chronic disease, interested in particular in sickle cell, and it's Black History Month, I think I want to say that Black people, even when we are in pain, do not owe anyone beyond the respect that you give to a person you meet off the street. We don't have to change, and we don't have to hide, and we don't have to not express the breadth of our emotions with being in pain just because it makes you uncomfortable. This is a condition that, and I see it every day, even from a kid to an adult, right? I see people not being believed about their pain, being called a difficult patient, right? Being called negative, having an attitude. If you were in pain 24/7 and you're a child on morphine, right? I go into your room, I'm not expecting niceties, right? I've never had to live that reality. And I think it's doubled down when you think about, the different stereotypes that Black people in particular have gotten. And so I think when you talk about chronic pain, when you talk about chronic disease, I just really want to put it out there that, it's beyond, it's not being believed, but it's also, we're so not able to express ourselves in the healthcare space. And it is really heartbreaking. And I just kind of want to speak to that because, again, when you are in a condition that is limiting your ability to live fully, I see time and time again providers and folks in the healthcare space be turned off and therefore giving inadequate care because this person wasn't nice to me. I don't think Black people in particular or anyone owes you those niceties when they're going through something that you're trying to help treat them for, right? And so I think that's what it looks like when we're getting it right. It's just expanding that education, but also remembering that we are treating people, we are people, and to see where people are coming from, right? So I will leave it there.
Beautiful. I mean, you got to trust what people say, and it's hard. I've lived with someone who had chronic pain for years, and you can't see it, you can't feel it yourself, and it is incredibly humiliating to go into the healthcare sphere and have your pain doubted. And this person was a white male, but I still see scars from it to this day. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Well, we're going to end with you, Ms. Givens, because I think you are showing us the other face. You're doing all this work that is so important right there with the community, helping, maintain good health and focusing on it from that point of view. Not just more prevention and not just reaction to a problem. And so what is your vision of doing it right, and how could we do better as the system?
Well, I love everything that's come before me, and I agree with everybody. So thank you. I'm not going to ditto those comments, but ditto, right? And thank you for mentioning the book club. Authentically Detroit, that's a podcast that I do. And this month we did a book club for the first time, and we read a book by Michael Harriot, Black AF History. If you have not read that, read it because it's a lot of fun. It's a great book and it's very informational. And that's where I learned about this disease that existed in the 1900s during times of slavery called drapetomania. And it was the disease of people who were enslaved, who were seeking freedom. It was like, you have to be mentally ill to want this. And so as we talk about implicit bias, I always think of humanity. And one of the things I've been really fortunate about is my ability to close my eyes and imagine what life is like for somebody else. That only works if you can imagine that they are human, right? So imagine if this human being is going through this, put yourself in their shoes. It's kind of like those kindergarten lessons where we put ourselves in the shoes of other people. And I think one way of dealing with it is let's just act like these are human beings, right? This human being has pain. No, they're not trying to get high. Yes, they have pain. What would you want as a human being? This human being is dealing with a sick and angry child, and they've been waiting for 2 hours in the waiting room that doesn't provide them with anything. Now just pretend like you're a human being and this is your child. And that really helps with a whole lot of things. Like, I think part of it is our ability to see people through this lens that denies their humanity. And so one of the things I always try to do is to rehumanize and help people understand who we're dealing with, right? That these are good people. People I serve in my community, a lot of them are poor. I love the people. Oh my God, I love the people in our community. They are so amazing. And I am so in awe of so many of them. And I always want people first to see who are these folks, right? There's this woman named Willie Mae Gaskin. She's 90 years old. I've known her since I worked with this organization in the 1990s, when she was apparently like 60 years old, and I know her now. And she still shows up, she still drives around, she comes to all of our events, she doesn't walk with a cane. She sent me a text message picture of my granddaughter from an event that we had. And I'm like, how in the heck are you texting pictures? You're 90. But anyway, this is an amazing woman who has sacrificed all of her life and does amazing things. She lives in the same house she's lived in since 1960s. And when you are doing anything to her neighborhood, you are harming Willie Mae Gaskins. And you need to know she lives there. And you need to know that she's probably a better person than you are, right? I mean, she's a better person than I'm just like in awe of her. So I think part of it is us really being able to see people for their greatness and see their full humanity. And when you don't, then it allows you to have policies that don't make any sense. Like, well, we're going to triple book you for appointments because you people don't show up in time. And you have a person who is working a job where they don't have a lot of time off, but then when they don't show up or when they don't stay for their appointment, you see these people, it just goes to show you can't trust them. And the negative outcome ends up reinforcing what you already believe in them, right? And I think, I was talking to some doctors because when I had my youngest child, I was calling around trying to find healthcare. He's 28 now. And I was trying to find healthcare. So I reached out to this healthcare center and they told me they could see me in about 13 weeks. And I was like, well, I'll be out my first trimester. Don't you need to see me during the first trimester? I'm like, well, not if you're healthy. Are you healthy? And I'm like, how do I know? That's why I come to the doctor to find out if I'm healthy, right? And as a matter of fact, it was a really difficult pregnancy. So I'm telling this to this wonderful woman who is now working at the same healthcare in the same hospital. And I'm telling her this story. And I said, well, is it solved? She says, oh no, we have real shortages of healthcare. So we still can't see people. We can't guarantee that you will be seen in your first trimester. But then we blame these women for being non-compliant. So the other question I have is whether or not if a healthcare system has limits, they will acknowledge that and then be willing to work with organizations like ours. So I said, fine, if you don't have the capacity to do that, why don't you give us some information and we can give them some prenatal vitamins and help them understand how to eat and how to protect their newborn, their developing fetus, so that we don't just say, well, we have a shortage. Sometimes I think healthcare systems need to understand limitations of what you can provide and the fact that there are people like me and others in the community who are more than happy to extend some of that work. So I think that's another issue. Again, I just think that we should want for other people what we want for ourselves, what we want for our own people. Most of us have been through things. My mother's had Alzheimer's, I lost my mother, and then I lost my sister and all of that. And I think when we really look at that and we get to a better place, it's not going to be because you have a better understanding, like cultural sensitivity. Don't be sensitive to me. Just know me, love me, understand that I'm human like you are, and know my people and love them. And let's work together. I really want to commend Healing Between the Lines at Wayne State University. You guys are amazing. I really loved working with you. We need more Black doctors. We need more Black nurses. We need more Black people in healthcare. It seems like there's fewer rather than more people entering into these professions. And so how do we, activate those pipelines? Taylor, Wayne State University used to be a leader in graduating Black doctors. And then it went down to one patient. So I think we also have to look at what are our criteria for admitting people to medical school and how do we support them? So all of that, right? And listen to women, listen to Black women, listen to Black people when you go to the doctor, all of that. So anyway, I'm really admiring these doctors and this upcoming doctor. It's really interesting because I used to work with her godmother in the organization I'm in right now. So it's such a small world. And I'm just really happy to see you in this role, Taylor, and just really admiring you, Dr. Dixon and Dr. Collins. And I hope that we are blessed to work with people like you. If you're not in the Detroit area, more people like you, because I think that together we're just a stronger community.
Amazing, you guys, absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'm speechless, truly. Anything that you guys want, any last closing comments, that somebody wants to make? And then we are at 7:17. I don't know if there are questions, and I'm sure people do need to go. But is there any last comments that, one comment made you want to add something?
We are stronger together.
You're stronger together. I love that. And see each other as just humans, right? Respect, trust, treat treat somebody else as you would want to be treated. Yeah.
And I think
Cindy, go ahead, Cheryl. Yeah, please.
I was just going to say, I do a lot of work with the youth, particularly the pathway programs and things, because I think that's so important. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for pathway programs and people taking an interest, and we can actually do that same thing. And I'm so proud of meeting all of you, because I think you all are doing that. And we talk about having more diversity in medicine. That's the way to get it, because people see you not only for the work you're doing, they see you for the example that you set. And it's really important. It's like you have, they say you have the reach hand forward, but you also have reach hand back. And that is so important that we keep that in mind, that we always have to have someone that we can mentor, someone that we can actually inspire, because people, kids are looking at you. The high school kids are looking at you, Taylor, and it's important that you be seen and you talk about your story and you talk about, I did it, you can do it, because that's how you will get there. I don't have any doctors in my family. I tell you where I came from, and it was like, you gotta actually do it. And I made it a mission for me for Pathways, because I know that that was important. And so that is something that all of us can do. And like you said, Dr. Collins, being stronger together, that's it. We can be stronger together, but we have to be there for the next generation. We have to be there so that we'll get better. It's better than it was for my parents. I'm sure it's better for you than it is for your parents as well. And we can only get better if we continue to support each other, but we're also supporting that next generation.
And each of you guys are doing exactly that. You're showing up, you're being visible, and you're reaching back and mentoring. I'm just humbled by the work that you're doing. Thank you. Everybody loved this presentation. Were there any questions in particular, Cindy, that you think we should ask, or should we just say thank you for the night?
I did not see any questions come through. It was very, very great panelists, presentations, very touching, very moving. Excited to get it. For those who didn't get to see it, I'm excited to get that up for everybody else to see.
Yeah, me too. Huge thank you, you guys. I've learned a lot, and I feel like we could carry on the conversation, and maybe we'll figure out ways to do that. I think it's really important. So good night, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye.
Great job.
Have a good night.
Thank you all
Good night,
so much.
everybody.
That was really good.